Luminaseach, Livnei Korah, Mizmor. Hear this, all peoples. Listen, all who dwell in the passing world, both sons of Adam and sons of distinguished men, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak wisdoms. The meditations of my heart are understandings. I will tune my ear to a proverb. I will solve my riddle on a harp. Why should I fear in the days of evil, when the evil at my heels is all around me, of those who trust in their wealth and glory in their great riches? Truly a man is not able to redeem himself or pay to God his own ransom. To live forever and not see the pit. The ransom for their sons is too costly. They will cease forever, for one sees that wise men die, the stupid and the brutal together perish and abandon their wealth to others. Their graves will be everlasting houses, their dwelling place from generation to generation, who called their lands after their own names. Man does not lodge in splendor. He is destroyed like the animals. This is the path of self-confident fools, and those who follow them, who accept their mouthings. Selah. Like sheep, they are destined for death. Death is their shepherd. When morning comes, men are their masters. Their forms decay in death. They have no homes. But God will redeem my life from the hand of death, for he will receive me. Selah. Do not fear when a man grows rich, when the glory of his house grows great, for when he dies he can take nothing. His glory will not go down after him, for in his life he blessed himself. Do well for yourself, and they will praise you. But he will go to the generation of his fathers. They will never again see the light. Man in splendor without understanding is destroyed like the animals. One of the thing that really intrigued me about the reception of this psalm was that, for me, obviously it's a psalm that's really concerned with death, and I think you mentioned that it's actually used in the sort of Shiva, the sort of time of mourning for Jews, but actually the in the verse 15, when it talks about, God will receive myself, that was, for me, the center of it, but it doesn't really feature very much either in Jewish or in Christian readings of the Psalms. Is that right?
It's interesting about the reception, because in terms of the actual verse itself, this idea of he will receive me, the Hebrew word is lakach, to receive. The only times it's used in the context of death is Enoch taken up to heaven, received by God, and Elijah.
Yeah.
So there seems to be a deliberate play on being taken up, and given the fact that the psalm is so sort of depressed about the transience of life and the rich getting richer and so on, it seems as if, a bit like Job, the only hope he's got is actually in some sort of indication beyond death, and he's going to be taken. And the ransom idea as well is an interesting so it's to my mind, it's odd, because I've also made a lot of it. This psalm and Psalm 73 to me seem to be the only two which really explicitly, in the context, say something about life after death, for the psalmist in particular. It's not an overall general expressed view of the whole community, but he believes he will be the one that's who's going to escape and be vindicated.
So, but generally, the way that well, both Jewish and Christian things have been much more on the kind of looking at the sort of riches and the, you know, the futility of that, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. On the more pragmatic side of giving to the, yes, not giving to the poor and the rich simply hoarding for themselves. There's a wonderful little picture in the Utrecht Psalter of a king actually putting money into what looks at first sight like a chest, you know, chest where, and you look again and it's a sarcophagus, you know, right. He's literally, you know, reaping his the worst things.
Well, it really is. This song does say, doesn't it? The thing that's in common parlance, certainly in English, but probably in every culture, which is when people say, well, you can't take it with you.
He was trying.
That's right. That's right. Well, it'd be very interesting to hear a bit more about how Sir Malcolm's take on the poem. But before we do that, let me just sort of thank you again for joining us for these conversations, and just to remind you that they came out of lockdown really when Malcolm was writing his 150 David's Crown, 150 poems responding to the 150 Psalms. Sue was just completing her magisterial 3-volume Psalms through the centuries, sort of looking at the way that the Psalms have been received by Jewish and Christian communities over the centuries. And I was just doing this selection of illustrated translations, the Book of Praises, which incidentally you can order a signed copy on the link below. That's the new thing. So anyway, I mean, Malcolm, we were talking about Psalm 48 last time, which you ended with that line about sort of Jesus, as it were, being at the centre of Jerusalem, and obviously you start this one in the same way, with that linking line where Christ himself is there to welcome you. But you go on then, making really that the sort of core almost of the response.
Yeah, because yes, precisely. The sort of 48 had this sense of in the inner Zion, Christ himself is there to welcome you. And then it's the idea that if you're in Christ, you're also in heaven. And that picks up verse 15 here, you know, in this thing that he will receive me, the very verse that you also show in that beautiful little miniature of the resurrection encounter that you have right in the middle of the graveyard.
Yes, or Lazarus.
So that, yeah, I did start with that, but then I was very, you know, taken, particularly, this was lockdown, you remember, and it's not simply that, I mean, firms were crashing everywhere, you know, stocks had gone down, the instability of worldly wealth, quite apart from the fact that you couldn't take it with you, and lots of people suddenly exiting life, you know, leaving their undisposed fortunes.
Yes.
And so the psalm that also, so I have I had this thing about the world is rushing, and also, you know, people swaying back and forth. I think there's a lot here about the instability of life, as well as the futility of accumulating wealth, you know, in the face of death. So, you know, I had this idea of the foolish veer between their fatuous desires and fears, with fickle fortunes that they fear to share. Yes. And that, of course, at the end of the poem brought me back to that sense of, I mean, the hidden text in this for me, commenting on the psalm, and obviously Jesus would have known this psalm well, is Jesus's whole story about the man who builds the barns and then he can't inherit them. And when he says, don't put your treasure where earthly things can corrupt it, put your treasure in heaven. And so that's
your lovely last line. Yes.
So that's where it
one of the I mean, the sort of lines I really responded to, and because it's quite a sort of the psalm almost seems to be kind of it's sort of kind of groping its way through these sort of strangenesses, isn't it, of the fact of death and the fact that everything, and the line I really like, he talks about, I'll tune my ear to a proverb, I will solve my riddle on a harp. I think it's the way I try.
Yes, which I picked up. I love that. Tell forth your dark sayings, as it were.
Yes. It's almost as if while writing about it, he comes to some in the psalm, it seems to me, is, I mean, I think you mentioned, Sue, again about this repeated phrase that you get about, you know, man is destroyed like the animals that sort of
Yes,
come
mortals
towards
cannot abide in their pomp. They're like the animals that perish, and that's a little refrain.
Yeah, like the beast. Yeah.
Once in the middle, and once at the end, as if it's trying to say, it's all going to be over. It's
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have the scholarship to know this, but it struck me that verses 3 and 4 about my mouth shall speak of wisdom and my heart shall muse of understanding, that this is real classic wisdom literature stuff. That those verses are in Proverbs as well. And
it's really interesting that we're doing Psalm 50 next, and that's a psalm where the prophets speak, and the same 4 verses introduce the next psalm, addressing people to take note. And in the next psalm, it's like a prophet speaking. Here, you're right. Yeah. It's as if it's somebody with wisdom vocabulary, proverbs and meditations and so on. Yeah.
Yes, and I think you say that some of the sort of Jewish interpretations actually use the fact that it's from the sons of Korah, and sort of you link this with sort of Korah, who is the person who's kind of judged in the.
That's right. The sons of Korah writing about their father, who actually abused his wealth, and this is what they're saying. That's what the Jewish tradition said. Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I love you have this again, your line, Malcolm, with between their fatuous desires and fears, when fickle fortunes they fear to show. I mean, and actually where your security is
keep your security in Christ. I mean, I was writing in a time of extraordinary and for many people subdue and counter to the sort of settled presumptions of a kind of entitled first world.
Yes, I mean, when I was illustrating, this is one that I used one of these wonderful lemonwood blocks. I wanted this kind of graves to be actually almost as a frame of the whole picture, so that actually that sort of death is all around us. But then there's that is, we mentioned at the beginning, that lovely verse, that he will redeem my life from the hand of death. He will receive me, and so I've got just a tiny. You can hardly see it in the book, but it's actually Lazarus and sort of Jesus and sort of Lazarus, which is
beautiful. It's also beautiful that that's in color, whereas the framing waves are all in black and white.
Yeah.
And I think that's got a real sense that the new life in the resurrection is qualitatively different from the old.
Yes.
In the way that color is qualitatively different from black and white.
Yeah. So perhaps this would be a nice time to hear the poem.
Thanks. So here we are, Psalm 49, Audite hac omnes. Where Christ himself is there to welcome you, then you are home, wherever you may fare. And Christ will keep your inner compass true, though all the world is rushing everywhere, this way and that, before the winds of fear, between false hopes and premature despair. But you can hear a different tune. You hear the strong song of his love. Open your ears to hear his parables. The foolish veer between their fatuous desires and fears with fickle fortunes that they fear to share. Keep your security in Christ, who hears the slightest murmur of your smallest prayer. And do not be afraid, but trust in him. Your heart's in heaven. Keep your treasure there.